Hello, YouTubers. This is Gold Standards User 924 coming at you with a special Wrestling Reimagining mini series for you guys today. Um, yeah, so I haven't really done a Wrestling Reimagining for a couple months, so I did, however, like the idea, despite the fact I wasn't really getting a lot of feedback from it. But this is going to be kind of like a 12-part mini series as far as this video is concerned. And this was actually a fantasy booking that I wanted to do for pretty much quite a long time. And I know I did like a video regarding the invasion angle, and to be honest, I just wasn't very fond of the way it turned out, and especially from the reception. And not a lot of people liked my invasion booking. And because I only used guys that were actually there during the invasion angle in 2001, so unfortunately I wasn't able to bring in like Scott Steiner to come in and attack The Rock and have a match on SummerSlam, for instance, or I can't have like Goldberg come in and have a match with Stone Cold. As cool as it would sound, and especially if it had happened in reality. But so I want to try to keep things a little realistic and a bit challenging. So the way the booking turned out, not a lot of people bought into it. So I've held off fantasy booking for quite a long time. And this is going to be also related to WCW and basically strictly WCW, as I'm booking the year of 1998. So 1998 was without a shadow of doubt, a pretty financially successful year for WCW. And just looking at the plethora of talent that was there at the time, and just a lot of talent such as you had your Ric Flairs, your Hulk Hogan's, your Randy Savages, you had the Stingers, the Lugers, a lot of top-notch main eventers that have been around WCW for a number of years. And even looking at the undercard, with guys along with Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, some names to speak of. And there's no denying just how much talent and how much depth there was in terms of the roster in WCW in 1998. So you'll probably be asking yourself exactly why are you considering to rebook the year 1998 exactly? Well, a lot of this stems from the controversy that happened after Starrcade 1997. You know, the NWO angle had been going very strong for over a year and a half, and you had someone like Sting who had been the top player for WCW for most of its existence. They were playing up this angle where Sting was up in the rafters. Everyone thought that people betrayed Sting. WCW people were thought that they doubted Sting, that he was that he would betray his own company that made him. So Sting ditched the surfer face paint that he was most known for in favor of the black and white face paint, the trench coat, very similar to Brandon Lee's character in The Crow. So eventually, he goes up the rafters for over a year. Then he's been attacking the NWO, and this has been building up months and months and months, and saying that and eventually Sting issues a challenge against Hulk Hogan at Starrcade, for the world title. So they did a contract signing. They had the match at Starrcade, and it's pretty controversial. With the fast count from Nick Patrick, and everyone believed that Hogan beat Sting all of a sudden, and then there was just a lot of confusion going on. Bret Hart coming in and somehow making himself the referee all of a sudden, and then Sting takes the advantage from there and locks in the Scorpion Deathlock on Hogan for him to win the World Heavyweight title. Fans stand in ovation. WCW roster empties out in the locker room and surrounding the ring. And that was basically how the Starrcade '97 ended. Yeah, so I hope you got that, but it did stir a lot of confusion, and I really want to rebook Sting's run, especially after Starrcade, because even though he had been world champion, he hadn't been like the central focus of the show. I mean, they were still focusing on the NWO's dissension between Hogan, Savage, and Kevin Nash come in the mix, and then you have the two faction wars between the Wolfpack and Hollywood, and then the Finger Poke of Doom that kind of negates the whole dissension that had been happening for a good chunk of that particular year. So yeah, so I'm basically gonna kind of rewrite history in this sense, and I don't expect people to like my booking. I know I'm not the best fantasy booker around. Hopefully, uh, this is a step up from my fantasy booking when I did the rebooking the invasion angle. So hopefully you take a liking for the booking for WCW '98 because there's actually a lot more talent on the roster that you could work on, and there's a lot of opportunities for a lot of these wrestlers to be given a second, somewhat a second chance, but also to be given a chance to really showcase what they can do. And I think that was the problem with when I was booking with the invasion angle because there wasn't really that much talent, especially for the WCW side since I was only rebooking just for WCW and not bring in the ECW guys to be like also like the alliance. I never did the alliance angle, just WCW coming in. So yeah, so this is basically a little bit of an introduction to the purpose behind this fantasy booking. So, without further ado, I'm just going to officially kick off this fantasy booking series by uh, basically starting off with the January pay per view sold out. And so, basically, what you need to know going into this pay per view, this is going to take place obviously after Starrcade, so we're going to start on the last Nitro of '97. Just basically the post Starrcade show, basically. So I would have Nitro open up, showcasing all the highlights regarding Starrcade, the entire pay per view in terms of the undercard matches and the main event especially. And then after they finish showing the recaps, there's a bit of exclusive footage that was cut from the pay per view feed. So you have like me and Gene Okerlund, who's the interviewer at the time. So basically, he tries to interview the NWO backstage. They're in their locker room. There's a lot of bickering going on. Especially that Hogan lost the world title. So there's just a lot of fuss going on, a lot of drama, so to speak. Um, yeah. So basically, the NWO guys just storm out of the building, or yeah, storm out the locker room, and basically going in their separate ways. And then we cut back to the opening scene for Nitro. So normally Nitro would always start off with the opening match, and the commentators would talk about what happened at Starrcade last night and what we're supposed to expect tonight. But in one of the rare instances, I would have Nitro open up with a segment with the new World Heavyweight Champion Sting. Hopefully, he comes out to a really big, massive ovation, a really big crowd pop. He hadn't been wrestling in over a year up until Starrcade, and to see him win the world title from the NWO kind of really gives that feel good comeback, and that WCW still going strong. Basically that they're back on top. So yeah, so Sting comes out, basically talks about how he brought the belt back to the company where it belongs, and he even explains a bit of the controversy surrounding his world title victory, and basically the management, or at least according to Sting, would explain that they stipulated a plot to overthrow the NWO by using dirty tactics against them, because basically the NWO have been known for getting away with victories, especially when you had like Hogan winning the world title. They will always, a lot of the matches would end in very dusty finishes where Hogan would retain the belt in a pretty controversial move, whether it be like outside interference or like DQ finishes and such. Anything they keep the world title for with the NWO. So yeah, so Sting wins the world title in a pretty controversial fashion that Hogan would normally do, or pretty much anyone in the NWO in general would do as well. but this is to kind of tell him to, basically telling Hogan to stick it, which is basically alluding to that infamous quote that he said that, when Hogan turned on WCW the night after Bash at the Beach. So that kind of, makes allusions to that infamous quote. And and then, Lex Luger comes out, congratulating his best friend on the victory. And, Luger even brings up the fact that, he and Sting kind of, the last time that they interacted, they haven't really had they had a pretty rocky relationship, alluding back to 1996's Fall Brawl pay-per-view where Sting walked out on in WCW, especially Lex Luger, who also participated in the War Games. So this kind of culminates with Luger apologizing to Sting. It's like, we're sorry, Sting. We didn't mean to doubt you. I mean, you were, supporting WCW all the way this whole time. I feel bad because I always consider you a best friend, and I really feel bad that that I just want to apologize for you. That hopefully stuff like this doesn't happen again. I should have understood you more, and now that you're the world champion, I'm thankful that you brought the belt back to where it belongs. It symbolizes the WCW World Title symbolizes the blood, sweat, and tears and hard work that it takes to become one of the greatest wrestlers out there. Something like that. So yeah, so the promo sort of ends where it's announced that Luger issues a challenge against Sting for the world title on next week. The first Nitro of 1998. So Sting kind of giving this excuse that he's still feeling a bit rusty from his match, and he grants his best friend a title shot. The week after, basically the first Nitro of '98, like I said. So that's how we opened the promo there. And then, Bret Hart will also explain his actions sometime later in the night, and, he realized what Hogan and company had done damage to, WCW, and knows what it's like to get screwed. And, Bret would obviously bring up, make subtle allusions to the Montreal Screwjob, because you obviously can't mention WWF, even though WCW would normally mention it time to time again. But you do make allusions to the fact that Bret Hart came to WCW to kind of really show that WCW is a place where that wrestlers bust their ass off week in and out to entertain the fans. And he had his love-hate relationship with the United States, and also making subtle allusions to when he was with the Hart Foundation, he would always tear on America because they don't respect their traditions, and only worldwide or internationally that Bret Hart gets more respect outside of America and such. But now that he's kind of come to terms with the United States, especially now that he's in WCW once again, he starts to realize that America is part of what makes WCW a successful worldwide wrestling promotion, and he plans on to keeping the tradition of in-ring wrestling alive, and we take it from there basically. Um, and then we get to let's see, and then we get to the main event on the first Nitro of '98. So we have Sting defending the belt. His first Nitro match since '96. So yeah, so Sting defends the belt against Lex Luger. They have a hard-fought match to close out Nitro. Sting counters Luger's torture rack into the Scorpion Deathlock and successfully retains the world title. So then after the match, Sting and Luger shake hands with mutual respect, showcasing that they've forgiven each other officially. And then we hear the NWO's music hit. And Sting and Hogan, they aren't sure what's going on. Everyone thought that the NWO was gone because they hadn't shown up on they haven't shown up on TV since Starrcade, so you didn't see them the next night on Nitro, basically. Yeah, so the NWO's music hits for the first time in a week, and the announcers put it over that we haven't seen them, and we thought that we were over with the NWO. I thought they were gone for good. And then, the NWO guys come in, attack Sting and Luger, strengthen numbers by this point, especially, since the NWO had been a pretty big alliance by this point. So, you have the NWO team come along, you have, the big stars like Hogan, Savage, the Outsiders, coming in. And then, basically Hulk Hogan, who lost the world title from Sting, basically cuts a promo saying that they've lost the battle. They're informing, the crowd that the war is far from over. And then he goes to explain the contract meeting that they signed back in November in the weeks before Starrcade, that, he informed them that he had a rematch clause. So, even if he lost the world title, he plans on utilizing that, I'm going to say the bullet point, and, that feature that even if he lost the world title, he could always ask for a rematch so he could face Sting one more time at Sold Out. And unlike, their first encounter at Starrcade, this time it's no DQ. Anything goes, no countouts. They could interfere, the NWO can interfere in the match all they want and they wouldn't be disqualified. So we have to have an official victor. So no more cheap tactics. You may have gotten away with it by using your own tactics against us. And now it's time for, the NWO to get their revenge, basically. And then, so we get to Sold Out, the official pay-per-view card. It was actually a really good pay-per-view in reality. So I don't think it will be that hard to kind of top it, but there will be some matches I kept on the card like they did in reality. So there's some matches I kept on here. But hopefully it's just as good, if not even better. But not to sound cocky or anything. But hopefully this card people can tolerate it. So to kind of kick things off, I have a television title defense. So Disco Inferno had been TV champion for about a month or two because he and Perry Saturn had a series of matches where they were kind of changing or hot potatoing the television title left and right. So I'm gonna have Disco Inferno defend the belt against Conan. Not a very long match. It doesn't really have to have a big build up because it's an undercard match, so it doesn't really need that to be elaborate in any shape or form. So to kind of really show that the NWO is really that they aren't going downhill in terms of their momentum. So we have Conan win the TV title from Disco Inferno. Conan trying to wins with the Tequila Sunrise, and brings back he wins the TV title, so he doesn't bring back the belt since they never NWO never had someone win the TV title up until this point. But Conan will win the TV title to kind of start up with a title change to kick off the pay-per-view. So to really show that the NWO is still going strong, basically. So Conan to win the TV title. Second match we have is Goldberg taking on Rick Martel. So Rick Martel was in WCW around this time. Just for about a couple months before he decided to hang it up by the summer of '98. So Goldberg, he was still starting off. His first pay-per-view match was against Mongo, and Goldberg, obviously went over Mongo since he was kind of going through a winning streak at this time. So a pretty short match, and this is kind of more of an enhancement match, especially since Rick Martel's kind of sort of a legend by this point. He wasn't getting like a massive push to the top of the main event scene or anything, but this is just something to kind of really showcase Goldberg and really showing that that this is supposed to be a sign of things to come for him. So so I obviously have Goldberg beat Rick Martel in a pretty short match. Pretty typical TV match that he would normally have at this time. So Goldberg wins with the jackhammer. And then the third match I have is Raven's Rules between Chris Benoit taking on Raven. So basically Benoit was feuding with the Flock around this time. He'd been feuding them since I think November or December. He had a match against Saturn at Starrcade, and because of the controversial finish where Raven and the entire flock members try to help Saturn out, and then like Raven nailed a even flow DDT on Benoit, and allowing Saturn to take the advantage and win the match. Um, yeah, so Chris Benoit's planning to get his revenge on on the flock, and especially Raven, who they were supposed to have a match at Starrcade, but Raven decided to opt out of it. But now that there's no ducking anymore, Raven can't you know duck as usual. So um, yeah, so Benoit and Raven, they have their match. I basically kept the match that they had it sold out. So Benoit goes over Raven. Enough said. I mean, the match occurred just as it did. So Benoit going over Raven. And then we have another match that I also want to keep from the actual sold out 98 card. And this involves the Cruiserweight title between the new champion, Rey Mysterio Jr., taking on Chris Jericho. So basically, on around this time, WCW Thunder had premiered on the first Thursday of 1998, January 8th of 98. And Eddie Guerrero had been champion at Sold Out, so people are wondering just how did Rey Mysterio want it. Yeah, so basically on the premiere episode Thunder, there's a triangle match between Eddie Guerrero defending the belt against Chris Jericho and Rey Mysterio. Um, and Rey Mysterio ends up winning the title in a it's not necessarily a dusty finish or anything. It's kind of more the fact that, going into this, Chris Jericho felt like he had the match won at some point. Like Chris Jericho does like a lion salt or something. And, tries to get the pinfall, but either the referee's distracted or he's knocked out, depending on the circumstances. And then Rey Mysterio gets back up. He attacks Jericho and maybe does like some kind of like a small package roll up or something, and Rey Mysterio would win the cruiserweight title there. So then Jericho gets kind of angry at some point because he felt like he had the match won, but he felt like he let his guard down, or he just feels screwed in some way, and Mysterio and Jericho, they have a match. Jericho had been showing seeds of turning heel at this time, so I wouldn't really change too much of it. And Mysterio was taking time off anyways, so Jericho will win the cruiserweight title here. So I actually had no problem with this match. So I thought it was actually really good. And then we have is a Florida Corners tag match for the tag team titles. So we have the Steiner brothers defending their belts against the Public Enemy, Harlem Heat, and Vicious and Delicious, which was basically a tag team consisting of Scott Norton and Buff Bagwell. Yeah, so WCW, especially in '98, if we're gonna look at in a hindsight sort of manner, basically their tag division was kind of looking very weak at this time, and a lot of it focused, with the NWO and the Outsiders, and even when they won the belts, there were times where they didn't defend the belt, or even when they lost the belts at some point, Eric Bischoff would end up reversing the decision to make sure that the title change never happened. So yeah, so the tag title belts were somewhat of an afterthought during the NWO angle, and especially just going to 1998. Um, Steiner Brothers have been had won the belts from the Outsiders and stuff, and then you also kind of built some dissension between Scott and Rick eventually, and they've been a tag team for over a decade, so they kind of ran their course as a tag team. Um, and Vicious and Delicious are part of the NWO. They were kind of a tag team that, like the Outsiders, they just were kind of more of an on and off tag team. So sometimes they would branch out in the singles competition, and then next thing you know that they're a team again. So it was kind of weird how they structured that tag team. And I guess it applies to the Outsiders as well. But getting back into the tag team match, just to kind of really showcase that WCW's tag division is still looking alive, still relevant. And I would actually have the Public Enemy win the tag titles here. And I think they were pretty over during this time. Steiner Brothers are prepared to break up, so I didn't mind them parting ways. So you kind of built dissension between Scott and Rick, just as they did around this time. So yeah, so Public Enemy winning the tag team titles. And then we get to the United States title defense. DDP would defend the belt against Perry Saturn. So yeah, so DDP eventually inserts himself in the feud with the Flock, and Perry Saturn had been a multi-time television champion. So Saturn figures now that he lost the TV title, he would take that next step and to go after the U.S. title against fight Diamond Dallas Page. Yeah, so he basically won the belt from Kurt Hennig at the previous pay-per-view. So I will keep the belt on Diamond Dallas Page, and they have a match, and DDP would retain the U.S. title. Like Perry Saturn does a Death Valley driver, and then DDP slips out and nails a diamond cutter, and retains the U.S. title there. And DDP celebrates after the match, and then the Flock, typical fashion, would ambush DDP, in a strengthened numbers, and you're basically assaulting him. And then Chris Benoit would come out and maybe come out with a steel chair or something, but eventually he tries to come in to even the odds and to kind of scare away the Flock or fend them off for that matter. Um, yeah, so Benoit saves DDP, and this is definitely a sign of things to come, especially for my next February pay per view. So something's gonna happen. Um, so yeah, so DDP to retain, and then we get to our double header main event. So this is basically gonna be a six-man tag match. I really wanted to keep Bret Hart versus Ric Flair, and as much as it pains me to take it away, because it was actually a really good match, and for those that are wondering about Ric Flair's condition in '98, um, I didn't really have much planned for him throughout most of '98. I mean, I know there was some uh, contract dispute between him and Bischoff, so I'm not sure what happened there. But I mean, I would like to keep Ric Flair around because he wasn't injured in '98 at all, but he had to sit out for a good portion of '98. But I think WCW could do really well. It wouldn't really hurt them, especially since they were doing really well financial wise. Especially even though Ric Flair was gone. So I don't think it would be that big of a loss because there's just as much talent on here, especially main eventers. So I'm not too worried about Ric Flair's absence. So I didn't really feature him. But he'll definitely come in by the end of '98. I'm just going to kind of spoil you guys there. But Bret Hart and Ric Flair will happen eventually. So just for those that are wondering. So as much as it pains for me to take away the Bret Hart Ric Flair match, I'm going to replace it with a six-man tag match with the Outsiders and Eric Bischoff to take on Bret Hart, Lex Luger, and Larry Zbyszko. And yeah, so basically, Bret Hart, basically, interfered in the WCW title match against Sting and Hogan. Bret Hart helped Sting win the world title. NWO just kind of are freaked out. Eric Bischoff especially is pissed off. Especially the way that that they lost the world title, and now that WCW has it in their grasp once again. So the NWO is entirely pissed, obviously. And and Bischoff's thing with Zbyszko, kind of also stems from Starrcade '97, and Bret Hart was also the guest enforcer or guest referee involved in the match. And Bischoff lost to Zbyszko by disqualification. So this kind of continues the whole Bischoff Zbyszko fiasco, but it also continues his Larry Zbyszko's beef on Scott Hall. Because they've had their share of verbal debates, and yeah, Lex Luger kind of gets in here because Zbyszko had helped Luger on a number of occasions, especially when he had a match against Scott Hall at Halloween Havoc, and Bret Hart and Luger, they've had their history, winning the Royal Rumble '94. Even though they didn't, they don't have to mention, exactly, but they do acknowledge the fact that Bret Hart and Luger have, they've crossed paths once before. So, but just to kind of put two main eventers together in a tag match, and Kevin Nash, because he's teaming with Scott Hall as the outsiders, so he still has his thing with the Giant because they were supposed to have a match at Starrcade, but didn't happen. But Kevin Nash does make a little allusions to the Giant that he wants that he'll get him eventually, but it's just a matter of when. And so I didn't book Giant in the match. Um, yeah, so this is gonna be a six-man tag, and I think it would be a pretty solid match. Hopefully, um, Bret Hart's gonna definitely win for his team. Bret Hart would lock the sharpshooter on Eric Bischoff to to basically win the match along with Lex Luger and Larry Zbyszko. And then the Giant would probably interfere in the match to kind of distract Kevin Nash, and they both brawl in the back, maybe. So um, yeah, so Bret Hart would eventually win the match for his team by locking the sharpshooter on Bischoff. And then we get to our main event. So for the World Heavyweight title, this is going to be, I guess you could say no DQ, no countouts. So yeah, so Sting would defend the belt against Hulk Hogan in a rematch from Starrcade. Yeah, hopefully no more BS finishes, hopefully. But you're gonna expect interference from the NWO, obviously, which is kind of what you'll expect. Yeah, so I know they did this at Super Brawl, but and Scott Hall won World War III, so he was supposed to be the number one contender against whoever the world champion was by Super Brawl. So I'm not gonna change the main event from Super Brawl. So I'm gonna stick Scott Hall on the Super Brawl main event as scheduled. Um, yeah, so we're gonna do Sting and Hogan at Sold Out World Heavyweight title. Hopefully, it's a lot better than their Starrcade match, which I'm pretty sure. Hopefully that it will. And there's a lot of suspense going on where the NWO comes in, and Sting tries to fend them off. Hogan, tries to take advantage. Almost looks like he's gonna win back the world title, but Sting eventually kicks out of the leg drop or something, and then Sting takes advantage. He bulks up, and then wins with the Scorpion Death Drop to retain the WCW World Heavyweight title. So yeah, that's pretty much it for my WCW Sold Out '98 card. So basically, it's only 8 matches. I really want to give some fair amount of time for the undercard matches, obviously, and not oversaturate with too many matches. Um, yeah, so leave a comment. What do you think about this card? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Is there a particular card that you would book differently? So, but this is kind of a start for my WCW '98 fantasy booking. Something I wanted to do for quite a while, but finally I get an opportunity to do it. So, yeah, so let me know what you think in the comment section below, and I'll be back eventually with my February pay-per-view Super Brawl 8. So, stay tuned for that. And until next time, this is Gold Standard Caesar 924 signing out.